Welcome to Ideas with Impact podcast. Today, I'm so excited to have a conversation with Kiki Keskinen, the visionary owner of WitchSchool. Kiki believes in a transformative power of spirituality as a cornerstone of midlife activism. In our discussion today, we'll explore themes of personal growth, spiritual exploration, and the importance of taking action to create positive change in our communities. Welcome, Kiki. Thank you so much for being on here.
Thank you.
Yeah, super excited. So let's start here and jump into your journey of how, or basically why you calling yourself a witch. In a positive way, obviously, right?
Yeah. We all have these Hollywood versions of what a witch is.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if you've seen Wicked or Wizard of Oz or any of the Hans Christian Andersen images of like the old woman living in the forest who eats children or has a magic wand and turns you into a toad and so those are images that people have in their imagination, and they've been created over hundreds of years. So I put on my best Canadiana for you today. I'm wearing my red toque and my flannel shirt because I love the country that we live in. And we didn't make up those images of witches, with green skin, and they were imported. They were imposed and they stuck, right? So my journey starts like many Gen Xers, where our parents kind of said, we'll leave a sandwich for you on the stoop, drink from the garden hose, and we'll see you when the lights come out at night, And we were wild. We, hopped on our banana seat bikes. We went into the woods. We went swimming. I fished for catfish. And so if any of your listeners can relate to that kind of childhood, I would say that those are the first cornerstones of feeling out your own wildness, your own intuition. And maybe you were a reader and you could sit under a tree and read for hours, or you were an artist. And so you had this creative spirit, and maybe your parents or your grandparents rolled their eyes at you and you were different. You somehow didn't quite fit in, or family discussions, around the table were, not to your liking. There was like, particularly that generation, right? The older generation, they may have had racism or homophobia, or they taught you how you had to be as a woman, as a lady, and
Speak properly, don't say anything unless you've been asked. Yes.
And so I'm old enough and young enough to have known that didn't feel good when I was talked to like that. And I fought back. And so if your listeners can relate to that, men, women, non-binary, I think it's very relatable. Some conformed, and I respect that too. They were like, go to church on time, dress up, get good grades, get married, do what you're told. And they did. But I did not. And I always wondered where that spirit came from in me. Like, why was I always pushing up against? Or why did I not conform? And I would go to church on occasion and really listen, more than a 10-year-old should listen. And I just couldn't figure out why the assumption was that babies were born, faulty, shameful and bad. And they had to spend the rest of their life sort of making up for it. So this is my way of answering your question, is being a witch isn't necessarily coming by it through your lineage or even learning how. It's more a state of being. And when you know that inside of you that the status quo needs shaking up, or you need to be more wild or listen to your intuition more, chances are you relate to witchcraft in its modern form. And I would even agree with archaeologists and anthropologists to say that that spirit has been in us humans forever, and that we have always had a magical quality about us, particularly women who give birth, who bleed between their legs once a month, according to the moons, who connect with the tides and have intuition. I mean, that's a pretty magical quality that I would say the status quo could never quite figure out. Like, you bleed and you don't die. You give birth like a portal and another human comes through. I'd say that's pretty mysterious. And what we know about history is that when it's too mysterious or too unknown, then it gets challenged and it gets oppressed, and it gets to be controlled. And so witches are a figment of our history, a fragment story of giving a label that's derogatory to women for the sole purpose of accusing them and putting them into a box that they can control. And so I would say I knew that young. And then the word witch became a way of owning it and claiming it for myself as a long history of uniting with the marginalized people and women from thousands of years ago who were misunderstood, oppressed, just for being themselves.
That's beautifully said. I think that during the Egyptian and Roman times, I think women still had a lot of power until the maybe like, the first 1100s. That's when the shift happened, and that's where we women, when we were the healers, we were the doctors, we were, the, I don't want to say the head of the family, but we were there for others to, and to really be there for others, creating these communities. And yet, I think, and I believe that this is something to do with the church, where they came and they start burning these women and proclaim them to be witches. And this could have been just some sort of like a part of us women to suppress us, that we have no power. But I think those times back then, that's what it was created, and we lost that feminine side. We were afraid. We were good to have babies, many babies.
Yeah. And like the burning times, I highly recommend. There's a documentary on the National Film Board of Canada. If you go to their website and you just type in the burning times, it's a documentary about 40 minutes long of kind of the Northern European story of the burning of women. And even though they refer to it as the burning of witches, I'd say it's actually the burning of women.
Yeah.
So what it created was fear. And I think we have some of that now, where if you create enough distraction, enough chaos, and enough examples of being oppressed, then it puts everyone else in line to follow. And then you operate out of fear. So, the truth of the matter is that witches are predominantly women. There are some men that relate to that, and certainly some non-binary folks that inherently are. But that magic, if witches claim to wield magic, it's because they work hard at building their intuition. And when you build your intuition, then you might have a sixth sense. And, if you think of your senses, hearing, touch, taste, smell. Well, your sixth sense is all of it together. And there's your intuition. It's like when people know things are going to happen before they happen. Or, deja vu. If you have deja vus, then that's a good sign you've been working on your intuition. And so in Witch School, we work really hard on rebuilding, rewilding our intuition. And we have homework assignments devoted to that. And we do a lot of work in group on rebuilding that intuition, because that's the part of women that I think is has been most oppressed. And I would say beyond the church, but even the state, like civil society can't possibly have wild creatures like women roaming free, going around healing at will. I mean, gosh, if they made a mistake, what would happen? And so by creating fear and by using women as examples and burning them and drowning them without fair trials, which, by the way, was all about a cash grab. You know, all you had to do was tattle on your neighbor who just lost her husband, who wore black and who wouldn't sell her land to you or accept your proposal in marriage. All you had to do was tattle on her to the mayor's office. And sure enough, someone would come and pay that person for tattling on them. And then someone would come and pick that woman up and bring her to jail. And then that person would be paid. And then there'd be a trial and those people were paid. And then if she was accused, she was brought to the village square and tickets were sold. And all that was paid for by the money from her land that was sold from underneath her, maybe by that same neighbor that tattled on her to begin with. So, you know, I think we have to watch history in order to see how we may be at risk of repetition. So Witch School came out of that. And I guess that's a form of activism, you know, community building, coming together, speaking amongst ourselves, and not letting the fear kind of rule our lives.
No, community is a big part of not only for women, but you and I, we spoke a little bit earlier about that, even for men, to coming in circle and sharing stories and rising up from, you know, what they've been taught, that they have to be men, they have to be tough. Men don't cry, men don't have emotions, they have to be there strong, which they are, but we women are also that way. But those are beautiful moments where people actually can come together and share these stories and build these communities where you feel so comfortable that no one's going to be judging you because of your experience or because you want to learn something new.
Really beautiful to watch. Yeah, it's about 13 women. I mean, men are invited, non-binary are invited, but it's predominantly women that come. And so when we learn about the anthropology and the history of women, we go back to Neolithic, Paleolithic times. We look at ancient artifacts in archaeology, and we piece it together because, you know, there's no written accurate stories of what it was like in nomadic society. We know from indigenous traditions around the world that earth, air, fire, water, in acknowledging those elements, is always part of an indigenous tradition. And so I really encourage women in the class to look at their own lineage and understand not just, you know, what the, you know, the family tree looks like, but go way back, like 1,000 years, and try and understand what did they believe before modern religion took over, or the patriarchy, or this form of civil society made them the way they are. Were there great-grandmothers 5 generations removed, were they healers? Were they wise women? Were they gatherers? How did they operate? How did they get to the countries that we now say, oh yeah, I'm of Irish descent? Well, actually, Irish came from Spanish. And, there's all these kinds of nomadic tracks around the world that all root themselves in indigenous land-based traditions. And so I really encourage people to pay attention to what their indigeneity might have been like hundreds of years ago. Because certainly in this country, in Canada, we're all visitors, to the indigenous peoples here. And we arrived on their shores and dropped a flag and said, we're here. Aren't you happy? And they're not. They're like, would have preferred had we remained curious and conscientious and been invited. But no, we took over. And so I think there is a role for understanding that we all feel displaced. And there's not just a land acknowledgement that's required by white folks who landed here or brown folks that immigrated here, but a certain reverence for the indigenous traditions that we arrived into, but also that we had from the lands we came from. And that, in fact, earth, air, fire, water is probably universal amongst all of them. And magical women healing people is also universal around the world in indigenous traditions. The way we help women give birth, the way we solve problems, the way we help one another with raising of children and gardens, very similar indigenous traditions all through the world. And so, and then you stretch and you think, actually, this is the same as animals. Actually, it's the same as plants. We are all interconnected.
When did you, I know you said that you realized that you were different at a very young age, but when you really connected to your spiritual path?
Yeah. I guess it was the early 90s, right? Some of your listeners may be able to relate to kind of this wave of female power that came up. Like, I think of artists like Sarah McLachlan and Tracy Chapman and Indigo Girls, and us young women, we started walking taller, and maybe you went to marches and you started getting involved and realizing like we had a right to our own body autonomy and sovereignty, and we needed to stand up for equal pay. And, that wasn't that long ago, right? It's 30 years ago. So, but at that time, I sat in a circle on a living room floor with about 10 other women, as anyone can do. And I looked around the room and I thought, this is very special and it feels kind of ancient. And we were learning about rituals. And rituals sound spooky to a lot of people, but they're not. If you think about going to a wedding, you always can predict what happens. The woman walks down the aisle, the man is waiting at the altar, kiss the bride, that's all ritual. And it all came from a pagan tradition called hand fasting, which is pre-Christianity. And so there we were sitting in a circle, like I'm in my 20s, and learning about what are ceremonies of choice? How can we make them more special? Like a baby shower. What the heck is that? What about a mothering ceremony where you're entering into mothering and you're showered with grace and appreciation for what you're offering the world, but also what you're leaving behind, a way of life, a kind of innocence, because you're about to walk the threshold of birth, and that's not easy, and you're never the same. So how do we acknowledge this rite of passage, this moment in time? And so we started to build ceremonies for each other. And we did that for about 18 years. And I started, to answer your question, I really started to understand that I was part of something much bigger. And these women, albeit they were older than me, and they're my crones now, like they're elders, I really value what they were trying to teach me, what I learned for myself, but also they put an importance on it. And like every dark moon and full moon, we met no matter what. And well, at about 36 years old, I was adopted when I was a baby, Summer of Love, 1967. All the teenagers were doing it. And so my birth mom, was in Montreal and their abortions were not legal. And she said, I'm going to have this one. And she didn't have any children after that, but she had the courage to have me. And so she put me up for adoption, as was the right thing to do when you're a teenager and you don't have any other choices. I wish she did, but she didn't. And anyway, she wrote on the files that I could reach out to her and we could meet one day or we could speak one day. And so at 36 years old, I reached out and I wanted to meet my birth mom. And I met her on my birthday. So that was really special. I flew out to Vancouver. And there we were walking on the seawall, our first day meeting. And she says to me, and this is after I'd had, probably 14 years of women's circles together with women that are 20 years older than me. And she says to me, like, yeah, this might be a bit weird, but I want you to know some of my history and my beliefs. Like, I come from a long lineage of witches and healers. We call ourselves nurses now, and massage therapists and Reiki masters. But really, we were witches from Ireland.
We were connected. Spiritually.
Yeah. And she didn't know my story. And so she started singing some kind of beautiful witchy songs that I knew by heart. And there we were, singing in harmony. Neither of us had known the backstory behind those songs, but that's when I really knew. Fast forward 20 years later, and I'm the founder of Witch School, and we have students across the country. And so I definitely like to tell that story because it does speak to the kind of nature-nurture component of it. But I think there is probably some genetic disposition in all women who had foremothers in their lives or aunties in their lives that had large effects on their intuition, their belief system, their understanding of healing powers or activism or making change when there's unfairness. And if you feel courageous about it, you call yourself a witch or a shaman, or, you give it a name.
Priestess,
but really,
goddess, whatever you want to call it.
You give it a name. It doesn't really matter. But you give it a name and you honor your ancestors by doing so. And you make it special because it is. We didn't get oppressed. We didn't get pushed down. We're rising. We stand up.
Yeah, I have, because I come from Eastern Europe, that has been suppressed quite a bit. And I know because my grandmother, my mom's mom, even though she was very religious, she was still a medicine woman where she would collect certain herbs, dry up certain herbs. And whenever we were sick, she would make these teas and different kinds of syrups and things like that. And that was a way for her to share her knowledge and everything with us. And I remember as a kid, hanging out on this big tree, that she was just like in love with that tree. She's like, don't touch these branches. Don't do anything with this. This is my tree.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I remember a lot of these moments, growing her own garden, and even though she was quite sick later on, she would still love to be in her garden, connecting with the earth and
Hmm.
feeding the family in the way, right? So
Yeah.
I think I have that from her quite a bit because I remember those moments as a
Yeah.
child. Yeah.
And those moments are, universal with a
Mm.
lot of our grandmothers or great grandmothers, where if you think back to your childhood, you saw your grandmother do really unique things.
Hmm.
I think if your listeners ever wanted to write you back on, like, well, what were some of the things your grandmothers did that seemed, kind of witchy, right? Like in your case, she may have made syrups or teas that were special for coughs or asthma or feeling better or falling asleep, and even
Hmm.
today, like I'm drinking this green juice, right? It is ginger and celery and avocado. And I'm thinking to myself, right, that's our modern tonic. And these are all things that were considered spooky,
Hmm.
were considered mistrusting. The laying of hands, massage therapy, or Reiki, that was used by grandmothers and great grandmothers, but all in secret. And I can think of some of my Italian friends, and they refer to their grandmothers as strega,
Hmm.
the Stregeria belief system.
Yeah.
That is the wise women of the village. They wouldn't call themselves witches, but they'd call themselves Strega.
Hmm.
You're speaking of Eastern Europe, so you would have the Baba Yaga.
Yeah.
And there's so many of these historical stories that have been vilified and they've been mistrusted. The
Hmm.
evil eye, right?
Hmm.
The evil eye.
Hmm.
If you Another wonderful thing your audience could write you about is, what are some of the superstitions?
Hmm.
The word superstition is so
Yeah.
strange. It's like, what are some of the superstitions that they have in their family that got passed down? Originally, those superstitions were meant to be positive. Like, you would put a ribbon on a tree, and you would
Yeah.
make a wish, right?
Yeah.
And that tree would go through the winter season, and in the spring your wish would come true. And eventually you would walk into a forest and you'd see a tree and it had all the ribbons on it, and you'd be scared of that tree. Oh no. But actually it's just filled with wishes.
Hmm.
So we've been programmed, to fear these special things that are meant to bring positivity and hope in our lives.
I call it magic,
Yeah.
just simple magic.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
my daughter, again, I'm going to bring up my daughter. I love my daughter so much. She's going to be 18, and I know she's connected quite a bit, but for the longest time, she would believe in fairies. And we would just let her because we were like, you know what? Even though she's 11 and 12 and she believes in that stuff, we're like, it's okay. Why would we as parents, shush her or tell her not to? It was her way of expressing herself, and she would love going in the forest and sit on a tree. She would have that special tree on this um, evergreen. It was big. I think it's about over 100 years old tree, and she would climb up, the uh, the tree up, and she would look up, and she's like, "Mommy, there's this little hole in this tree." She was like, "These fairies, I believe they live there." And it was just the most incredible thing. Like, I asked her today, I'm like, "So do you think there's fairies?" And she's like, "Mom, come on now." But it's okay. Like, she's going through her own process right now of whatever it is. But I just find it so beautiful that
Yeah.
she believed in that for such a long time. And even in when she went to elementary, teachers would say that she would be very imaginary. Like, her imagination was wild. She's like, we've never dealt with children who had such a wild imagination. And it was so beautiful to hear that because I wanted her to express in that way. And feel the energy of the earth or connecting with whoever she could have connected with, which was totally okay with me. So yeah, it was
Yeah.
magical.
And if we look at just fairies, right? Just
Mhm.
fairies alone. And we know, like, eye roll. You believe in fairies, but how are they any different than angels?
Mm.
They really have maybe a different look, but that's our artistic mind that packages them up.
Mhm.
And many religions have, hijacked pagan traditions
Mhm.
and they've made it their own. And I would say that angels are kind of the original fairies, right? And I think about my Catholicism training and I think about the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Well, I want to know who the Holy Ghost is. Like, we don't talk about that very much. Like, what's the spirit in Christianity? And I think that's a nod, tip of the hat to pagan beliefs, right? Is magic. It's what you're talking about. It's using our imagination to manifest
Mhm.
and to wield power. And that can be very disruptive to a civil society.
Mm.
So I wouldn't just blame the church. I would blame the packaging of our civil society, our capitalist society today. The empire was built on the backs of those that they could not control. And frankly, that may be reoccurring. And we need more witches that are going to stand up either in kindness or in care or in healing or in activism, but that they're going to come together, first of all, and find one another. And so I think that's, instead of wearing like a black pointy hat, and I have a story about that, or carrying a broomstick around, and I have a hilarious story about that.
Would love to hear it.
Yeah. We don't self-identify. Like you and I don't look like witches, and yet we practice magic
Mhm.
and we teach others and we share what we have. We don't hoard it. We don't like keep it only for ourselves, and you have to convert to become. It's available. It's
Mhm.
out in nature.
Yeah, and this again brings us or brings me back to um, having community of women and men together to come in and expand
Mhm.
expand the knowledge, expand our intuition, learn how you can tap
Yeah.
in into that
Yeah.
intuition.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned men in witches, and I agree. I think that we also have a kind of feminine and masculine going on inside of us,
Mhm.
receive, drive. And, men do too. And even though their outsides might have these bits and parts, they may very well have like a strong internal feminine dialogue that is nurturing and has healing qualities. And they just want to like wake that up. And so they often will, um, we probably had 5 men and maybe 5 non-binary folks that join witch school out of 400, and they get a sense of like, right, my inner feminine dialogue, if that's what we want to call it, is more awake, is more open.
Mhm.
And I have a different way of looking at a problem with a new solution. Like you said, you have these kind of polarized views sometimes, and you need to quiet one down and make one louder, and maybe the one you're making louder is the no. And I often say to witches, the first thing that happens is, it's great to figure out no, right? Like just no, 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 no. Because then you start noticing, I have some commonalities, and then you have knowing, and you get more confident in your knowing.
Mhm.
But instead of a whole bunch of yes, 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 sometimes it's easier to be like, no, I don't like that. No, I don't want that.
Mhm.
And that's one way to build intuition, is to figure out what you're a strong no at.
Mhm.
And then you start realizing, I guess I have a lot that I know about, and I have a self-awareness and a knowing. And then you can move from that into your yes.
Mm. Yes, and that also teaches you your own boundaries. Because you're right, if you say yes to everything, that's not good either. Yeah.
No. Yeah. All right. So the story about black hats.
Yes.
Okay. So I worked at a beer company in my early marketing career, and that was a bit weird for me, but I was realizing that brewing beer also is connected to witches. So, in the busy markets, people wanted to buy beer. And think about a busy farmer's market, in your mind's eye, and there's lots of crowds and people mingling around. And so the brewmasters were originally women. You think about it, it's kind of magic. There's yeast, there's sugar, there's clarified, purified water, there's, different grain ingredients, and you're essentially making a tea that then ferments. And that fermentation process becomes alcohol. And it's a sugar mixture, but it really is originally a tea. And so women figured out this brew and they started to perfect it. And I think beer is one of the oldest liquid potions ever. And to this day, we love this stuff, right? So these women would brew special batches of beer and they'd want to sell it in the farmer's market. But they didn't have a stall. They just wore a tall, pointy black hat so they could be seen over the crowd. And that way, you could find the pointy black hat with the characteristics you were familiar with, and you would say, I want to buy that witch's brew. And that witch's brew has been consistent, and I can drink it, and I get no hangover, and I feel good, and I get a little drunk. That's magical too. So it was the witches that were identified, like they brew the beer I like. But what if it was a beer that you drank too much of, that you got too drunk, you got hungover, you got into a fight? You would blame that witch's brew for your behavior. And then you would say that witch's brew is bad or dangerous, or she poisoned me. And so it was a quick accusational transaction. So the best brewmasters wore the tall, black, pointy hats and that became the connection to witches.
Interesting. Never heard of that story.
Yeah, the original brewmaster hat. Okay. I don't know if your listeners are ready for the broomstick story.
Well, let's do it.
Okay, all right. I think I reframe the story just because it's fun to do that. And storytelling is a magical practice, isn't it? It's kind of a way to stick a lesson in a way that's easy to digest. So once upon a time, let's call him Peter. And he would run from the village square to the old shack in the woods where the woman lived alone. She had just lost her husband not long ago, maybe 2 years ago. She wore all black. But she was still a young enough woman that Peter was entranced by her. He would look in her windows sneakily to watch her. What is she doing? This mysterious woman who lives alone, gasped. Didn't remarry right away as a righteous woman should. Irony. So Peter was just at that age, 14 or so. And he looked in and she would be sweeping with the broom. And he could see the broomstick above the window sill. It was going up and down. And as she was sweeping, he would hide behind the tree as she swept the dust from the wood-paneled floor out the door. And she would return and do it again and again and again. And this was delightful for him. In fact, things were happening in his body. He might have been attracted, but not understood what was happening to his body. And he got closer and closer as he started to see her laugh and cackle with her head flung in the air and laughing loudly. And he was like, what is she? So he got closer and closer. And he saw the broomstick between her legs. And what we now know, she was giving herself an orgasm with the end of the broomstick, as a single woman should.
Mm-hmm.
And so the broomstick imagery of witches, because you can imagine Peter fled the scene, ran to the village square, put up his soapbox, and told everyone that she was a wild witch riding a broomstick, laughing, cackling at all of us. He didn't quite understand what she was doing with it. And he had had a bodily effect that he could not explain. And so she must have cast an evil spell on him. And so when you think of witches riding broomsticks in the sky, just think about the original dildos.
This is exactly what I'm going to be thinking about right now.
Yep.
It's funny because I always wonder, I'm like, who came up with that story?
I know.
That these green witches with these hats, even in kids' stories, ride these broomsticks.
Yeah. They're all having orgasms. And some, like even like indigenous interpretations of some of those stories are that there were like plant medicines on the broomstick, right? That would accelerate, that would enhance the orgasm. And that
yeah, this is another conversation that we women have been suppressed when it comes to sexuality, pleasure, and everything. So thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, it's our suppressed history.
Yeah. What does sacred feminine means to you? And how you or how can others connect with it, or other women can connect with it?
Yeah. I mean, divinity is an interesting word, right? I always add the sacred, divine, feminine. I think it's in all of us, non-binary, women, men. I think it's in children, it's in animals, it's in plants, it's in the earth itself. And so when we walk on this land that's not our own, by the way, land back means bring the land back to the land, is recognizing that it is all sacred. And feminine being, it's nurturing, it's growing, it's developing, it's also healing itself. And that's pretty magnetic, and I think the sacred divine feminine starts in the land itself, how it's able to regenerate. And then if the earth was a woman, and it is, like think about so many of the same things that happen in the earth, in the ground, in the trees and the plants, that happen in our own bodies, men, women, non-binary, doesn't matter. But like if you have a broken bone, it's one of the most amazing things that when you break a bone, I mean, it's awful and it has a shock effect, but it's also a piece of magic. The bone breaks like a branch and it knits itself back together again, literally with enough, vitamin D and magnesium and calcium. It will crochet itself back together again until it's healed. It's really magnificent. And that is sacred and wonderful, and wonder being the key word. And so sacred feminine to me means noticing all these incredible, magical, healing activities that are happening all around us and within us. And when we can really acknowledge that and be grateful for it and see it, then we can build more of it around us. And those nurturing qualities that parents have, those qualities can be applied to our jobs, to our communities, to the greater world, to the way we treat animals, to the way we treat our in-laws, to the way we treat our enemies. Imagine if we took those parenting skills, those sacred, divine, in this case, feminine, and we brought them to the world, the change in conflict and the change in kind of resurrecting kindness would come from it. And to me, that is the sacred, divine, feminine.
Yeah. I think there's a big shift happening. The feminine is really coming to the surface. Or maybe just because I am involved with a lot of women and I'm seeing it in myself. And I hope that, our humanity around the world is doing the same thing. But where I'm at right now is I'm seeing the positive. I'm seeing the change.
Yeah.
There has to be definitely a change in the relationship between us humans and the and our mother Gaia, the earth,
Yeah. And having the power of community helps us build resistance. Resistance in this was required in the suffragette movement. It was required in the abolitionist movement, the indigenous movement. Resistance isn't just marching and news headlines and being angry. Resistance means small and certain acts of kindness and healing and transforming where we can. Because activism isn't defined one way or another. Activism happens each day, each argument that you resolve, each conflict between two people that you can help facilitate a good, healing end, self-care, care of your community, and teaching children. I think those are activists' mandates today.
You mentioned self-care. How would you define self-care in a way?
Yeah,
that's a big one.
It is, because I'm like tired of oh, isn't it nice to take a hot bath with candles? I'm like eye rolly about that. I'm like, that's base level what we should all just naturally do as part of normal life. Like spas and baths and massages, seeing healers, that's like base. I don't even think of that as self-care anymore. Self-care is like a little more work. It's like how to go from meditation to trance. Because trance builds up your third eye, your intuition. And it's that place between awake and sleep where you are thinking of nothing, not even mindfulness. And you rest in a way where your mind is gone to sleep, but you are awake. And in that trance state, to answer your question, self-care example, trance. In that trance state, you're giving yourself a long-term gift of building that intuitive muscle that kind of lives in the back of our head, makes our head feel heavy when we're in trance. And it's going to serve us really well down the road, but it's also going to serve our families and the people around us. So deep practices, going deeper in our healing practices. Self-care to me means go back to school. If there's something that's been on your mind, like, you've always wanted to go to law school, now's the time. go to law school and do good with that degree. You know, if it's humanitarianism, environmental care, supporting your local community, the marginalized communities, now's the time to go back and do self-care in the form of continuing your education. Self-care is also spend time in nature. You know, and I don't mean take a nice walk, you know, good fart walk at the end of the day. Like, I mean, like, leave your phone, go by yourself, get lost, and forget the time. Put your hands on the tree, listen to what the tree is telling you.
Connect to the energy, ground yourself.
Yeah.
That's kind of like a reconnection with nature for me, where I go in and you and I, we both live in the very same area, surrounded by beautiful Uruguay forest, Gatineau parks, and being outside there with Mother Nature is, so beautiful.
My latest passion is moss. I love moss. And so I've been collecting moss for 12 years. So I collect, you know, some people collect stamps or like crystals. I collect moss. And
what do you do with that?
Yeah, so I personally think moss is better than grass. And I think its color is amazing. It has an incredible water absorption level, and it can grow the best little tiny mushrooms known anywhere, like most colorful. And I love lying on moss. So those are all great outcomes of moss. If I find a good piece of moss somewhere on my walks, I'll come with a spoon and a plastic bag, and I'll ask permission, and I'll maybe do an acknowledgement that I'm picking up this little square of moss and putting it in my plastic bag, or any kind of bag. I have my single-use plastic bags that I use like 100 times. So I use these bags of moss, and I'll make a patchwork quilt on a part of, you know, my backyard, and I'll start putting yogurt on the roots of the moss with a paintbrush, and I'll pat the moss down. And then it likes to be stepped on, hilarious. And so I'll pat down, or I'll step on it. And that yogurt, the bacteria from the yogurt propagates the root system, and it starts connecting faster to the earth that it's attaching to. But it'll also make friends with its fellow root systems from other mosses. And so literally like a patchwork quilt, I have made a moss quilt, and it's bright green, like tennis court green. And some parts of it are dark green. Some are tall fibers, low fibers. Some it's almost like it's the kind that's on a rock, and it's just like a little blanket. So I am like in love with moss as a solution to grass. And so that's part of my, you know, self-care practice, is to really nerd out on something in particular where I'm continuously learning.
That's very, very unique. And
they're of different, they're coming from different places. So a little bit of a, you know, kind of a, they're immigrating, you know, and they have to figure out how to live side by side.
Very interesting. I'll be paying more attention to that for sure now. I know I have a big rock in the back, and there's some moss growing on it as well. But I just let it be because it's part of nature,
easier to pull a little square of moss up from the ground rather than a rock, but you can sometimes pull it off a rotting log. But just know, when you're pulling it off, you're also displacing a lot of creatures, you know, and so you have to acknowledge that change is happening. And that too is a micro society that we know very little about. So I do it sparingly, but I do love it.
And do you just plant that around your property where the moss just grows?
Yeah, sometimes I plant it in a ground quilt so that I have a special spot by my witch's shack, because I have my own, you know, all these garden shacks that people buy so that they can put their gardening equipment. Mine, I converted to a witch's shack. It's where I make my herbal mixtures. It's where I dry flowers. It's where I sit in trance state. And frankly, it's also where I do a lot of witch school work from. So I have a table and chair in there and a window. And so around that witch's shack is my patchwork moss quilt.
Hmm. Can you share a little bit more about your school? So if anyone's interested,
Sure.
how your program works, how can people connect with you?
Yeah.
How long is the
I mean,
program?
I just love witch school. Like it's my passion, my life passion project.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I do other things too. I teach at university. I'm a coach in private practice, but and I do voice work. You and I have talked about that.
Mm-hmm.
My ability to put people to sleep. I hope I didn't put your audience to sleep, but I do guided visualizations, and I use my hypnotherapy techniques like EMDR, and
Mm-hmm.
I help people fall asleep. It's an amazing skill I have. But Witch School is a delight. So it's 13 students that enroll, and they fill out an interview form because I do like to curate the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And it's $2,300 for 11 months of the program. It's very intensive. There's
Mm-hmm.
homework. It's really ideal for women and men in the middle of their lives. Like the kids are growing, they don't need you as much. Work is, on that retirement edge. Maybe you're freshly divorced or you're thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the best time to enroll in witch school
Mm-hmm.
because for 11 months, you're going to have 12 women on your team who you don't have to be best friends with afterwards or during. You're learning together, but you're focusing on magic and turning on more magic in your life and how to access that. The first semester is anthropology and history of witches, and it's like it's scholarly, and it's documentaries and PowerPoints. And then the second semester is hands-on learning. So you learn the basics of tarot, runes, shape shifting, herbal magic, how to cast spells, how to host and officiate rituals and
Mm-hmm.
ceremonies, but also, some of the basics like how to manage a circle. So if you always imagined, I want to lead circles, that's fantastic, but you have to learn how
Mm-hmm.
because disruptions happen and eruptions happen
Mm-hmm.
amongst women. And so that needs a process and a technique. And so I have 9 teachers that come in and teach their area of speciality. And then the third semester is 5 months long, and it's all about leadership. And I call it like the MBA for witches.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's like a leadership training.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you want to do with these magical skills, this magical life?
Mm-hmm.
So women come up with a statement for themselves. And it always starts with the words, I am, as if it already
Powerful
happened.
word. Very
Yeah, right?
powerful. Mm-hmm.
So that's semester 3. And by the end of the 11 months, you've pretty much gone through a heck of a transformational change. And so if you think back to like, who's this ideal for?
Mm-hmm.
You're going through it with these other classmates, and there's sharing, there's confidentiality, there's brave spaces. We cannot guarantee safety all the time, but brave spaces. But there's an incredible discipline and structure to entering witch school. And then coming out of it, you have a large community of alumni that are all sort of waiting to dance with you, waiting to dance and spiral dance and circle, to drum around a campfire, to meet in person in whatever province you're in, whatever state you're in. Guarantee there's witch school alumni that want to meet with you. So that's kind of the community building side of my life. I just think it's one of the best things. Countless. You can check on like WitchSchoolCanada is on all the platforms. Check it out. See if it's for you. It's not for everybody, and that's pretty apparent in the intake interview. And so I spend 20 minutes with each prospective student to make sure, like, are we a fit? Are we on the same page? Is this going to be good for you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What is your vision for the future of the witch community?
Yeah, I mean, I think growing community, even for yourself.
Mhm.
So when you come out of witch school, you've got some new skills, and you've got peers. And so what are you going to do with it? And I think that's where it gets exciting. You start building small groups around you, and you put importance in these intergenerational groups where, it's older women, younger women, but we all grow together. And we're growing in different areas and in different ways. But by sitting in a circle in a non-hierarchical style, just like our indigenous foremothers and the indigenous women of the land that we're residing on, we can really listen and be present for one another rather than advice or fixing. We can just be present. And just that alone is my goal for Witch School.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome.
Would you like to share any final thoughts with the audience?
Yeah, well, I'm really delighted to be on your podcast. I've really enjoyed it, and I recommend being a guest on this podcast to anyone. I do feel like there's an opportunity for all of us to take these kinds of podcasts and not just listen to them on our drive home, but to take it in and take action from it. And, like reading a good book, a podcast isn't just a quick listen, it's a call to action. And so I invite your listeners, like, what do you want to do with this one great life?
Ask that question. Yeah, it's important to ask that question.
Yeah.
Well, Kiki, thank you so much for your wisdom and your sharing. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, such a pleasure.
I will definitely attach all your information at the bottom of the show notes. So everything's going to be there.
Okay. Thank you so much, Aleksandra.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Bye.